Hello and welcome. It's 310 to Left, the podcast that you just can't live without during the Red Sox season. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Caron from Nesson, a little bit hoarse after a long day on the trade deadline trail, and we are joined by Alex Speier of the Boston Globe. As always, Alex, how are you today?
Recovering. How are you, Tom?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. It was a long, humid day at the ballpark, and we've got a lot to dig into. Probably not as much as Red Sox fans wanted us to be able to dig into. They were looking for the big name, the exciting name. The Red Sox didn't get the big, exciting name, Alex. But what is your overall impression of what Craig Breslow did on his first trade deadline?
Marginal upgrades at areas of need, right? Like they had a checklist that they wanted to address, and they, in some form, to some degree, addressed all of those items. Obviously, relief. We've seen the bullpen collapse in the month of July, and so they were able to reinforce that with the kind of late acquisitions of Lucas Simpson. Then, with 5 minutes to go at 5:55 p.m., they closed the Luis Garcia deal with the Angels. So they have more arms available while they're waiting for those two guys to come back. The right-handed bat part, that one's probably the strangest fit for the Red Sox thus far. They had a clear need to upgrade against left-handed pitching, to strike out less against left-handed pitching, and you figured that they would probably try to do so somewhere in the infield, and instead they ended up with the acquisition of Danny Jansen, who over the last 3 years has been a good hitter against lefties, but it doesn't, they've had some struggles at second base for quite a while at this point, and really they're the worst offensive team in baseball at second base in the 2024 season, and so that the way that they approach the right-handed bat, it is a check, but it's a strange check. It's not the kind of traditional shape of it, I think. And then, of course, the starting pitcher, they did get depth both for the short and long term, which I think to be able to operate on both of those fronts is pretty impressive in this trade deadline, given how difficult it was to acquire controllable starting pitching. The Scoobles of the world weren't available this trade deadline season, and Garrett Crochet didn't move, and so the fact that they were able to get Quinn Priester as a longer term project while also shoring up for the short term with James Paxton, it ain't Jack Flaherty, but they didn't have the same incentive as the teams that are World Series or bust, like the Yankees and Dodgers, to try to pursue Jack Flaherty.
It's perfect summation. I think it's interesting that they kind of did go all in on a wild card spot, right? I mean, I feel like they did enough to bolster their chances to make the playoffs. I don't think I don't know about playoff probabilities if they changed much today. I didn't look. I don't know if they changed any realistic expectations of them winning the World Series. But this team, I don't think, is about winning the World Series, right? The hope is that this team could get in the playoffs, be healthy, have Tristan Casas back in the lineup and being productive, and maybe Liam Hendricks being part of the bullpen along with the two new guys and Chris Martin and Justin Slayton coming back. If that all happens, then maybe you could try to be the 2024 Arizona Diamondbacks, right? Just make the playoffs and surprise some people and have fun October baseball here at Fenway. Have the young players get the experience in the postseason to build on for the future. They didn't blow up any hopes for the long term. They didn't trade any of their top 10 prospects. And while they didn't get the big sexy name that I think a lot of fans wanted, they did address the needs that they said they would address. Marginally, with Danny Jansen on the offense, I agree with you that I think that the biggest surprise for me is I thought in that final hour yesterday we'd hear, again, maybe not an exciting name, but a right-handed bat that could come in and platoon and be part of the mix. Rengifo didn't move. Rooker didn't move. A couple of guys that you thought might fit. I thought Rengifo was there without having to give away too much, but maybe the asking price was just too much. And that seemed to be the framework that a lot of this happened within yesterday, right, Alex? I mean, the asking price was a lot. You saw the market set in the days leading up. Some of the trades, what they got for Kikuchi was crazy. What some of these deals brought back were crazy. And you had to just think, okay, they're not going to do as much as we thought because the asking prices have spiraled astronomically.
Yeah, the asking prices were big relative to what we've seen in recent trade deadlines. I feel like you saw a decent number of top prospects move, not a ton of top 100 prospects in the industry moving. So there was, so as much as we say, oh my gosh, like they gave up their number 5 and number 7 prospects. Like the reality, especially in bad systems, is that like those guys may never pan out. So like but at the same time, in order like usually teams are attracted to that, like if they've established I can get the Phillies number 5 and number 7 prospects, they're going to be asking for the same guys from your system, right? The number 5 and 7 in your system. So let's say that for the Red Sox, that would represent someone like Franklin Arias, who has emerged as a breakout prospect for the Red Sox, who is flying up boards. And there's an interesting case to be made that he's right around number 5, or Miguel Blaze, who has this kind of like shoot the moon potential in single A Salem. And for the Red Sox, given where they are, like 2024 is it represents a building block for them. But especially for a rental, when you're eyeing the wild card as your realistic scenario, like when you're pushing chips in, the idea of increasing your odds of getting a wild card spot versus not, the appeal of that is only going to go so far in terms of moving the prospect needle, as compared to a team that's trying to win a division and get a bye for the first round, which has huge strategic advantages, or get home field throughout the playoffs, also a huge advantage, where your focus is on, kind of like solidifying a rotation for a World Series run, which is what we saw the Orioles doing, or trying to do at least. The Red Sox were in a different boat in terms of what they were willing to do with their prospect pool, and Craig Breslow was pretty candid about that.
See, but I'll disagree with one thing you said. If I'm the Orioles right now, I'm trading away my players because I don't want the bye in the first round. You lose. Every time you get the bye, you lose. And you get swept in the second round. I would try to lower my expectations to get to the wild card, because that is clearly the surefire way to get to the World Series. I do think, and you and I are so in the weeds when we watch this, right? That you pull back and 4 o'clock came and went, or Garcia was announced after 4 o'clock. But when we got the news for Garcia, I was like, okay, they've addressed their biggest area of need. They have addressed the bullpen. These are two veteran guys. We'll see what happens. But they traded prospects for rentals, right? I mean, for two relievers who are going to be free agents after the season. And so to me, that is, again, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about lanes and blinkers and passing cars. We've done enough of that. But it was a pretty clear indication that Craig Breslow did pick the lane and traded away future value in order to get his team stronger now. Now, again, there are other things that we'll get into, right? The Rule 5 ramifications of some of these guys he traded away. They were going to have issues figuring all that out, so you might as well move them and get something now. I understand it, but there's no muddying of the message here. When you look at what they did, except for the one York for Priester, prospect for prospect, put that one aside, because I think that was an opportunity to do something that they think will help them in the long run. But all the other deals traded away prospects for players who are here to help now. And it's been a few years since it's been that clear what the intentions are, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, like 2022 was a weird one because they did acquire guys like Tommy Pham, who were free agents to be, while also moving out. So that one, we need not revisit that one, which was unique and complicated. But yes, you're 100% right.
But hang on, Alex. But that was where they didn't pick a lane, isn't it? I mean, to me, 2022 is the classic example where he tried to straddle the two yellow lines and risk yourself to getting hit by oncoming traffic, which is what happened. And not do enough to rebuild for the long term, right? They tried to do both, and you could say, looking back, that some of it worked, certainly, but it didn't help that season.
Yeah, correct. Right. Absolutely right. The commitment to 2022 was kind of play for the tie, and in this case, it wasn't play for the tie with 2024. Right, there was a clear commitment. Now, we can wind back and say, like, that commitment to 2024 that occurred at the trade deadline was in opposition to what happened before the start of this season, right? Like everything that happened during the offseason that was about, like, that was about focusing on never compromising 2024, future wins for 2024 wins, and like how that may have limited them or left them in a position where they had to make these upgrades. But setting that aside, at the trade deadline, and really every move that they've made in the season, right? Like they picked up Dom Smith early in the season after Tristan Casas went down. Dom Smith, by the way, is playing incredibly well, and that's a little bit of that's going to be an interesting thing for them to figure out when Casas is back and available. But they were reinforcing. They weren't just saying, well, okay, our guy is injured, so we're going to see whatever we have in the system and not bother to try to acquire someone to fill in for him. But yes, continuing on that, 4 trades that were all made for rentals with Paxton, with Jansen, and then with the 2 relievers, and they did give up future value, and in some cases, like we it's not just system redundancy. Like a guy like Ovis Portes, who was traded for Lucas Sims, is a guy who has a pretty electric arm, who's 19 years old and in single A ball, and in that one is a clear long-term future value in exchange for short-term need.
All right, I want to keep going here, but a lot of what we're going to say, we're going to hear from Craig Breslow and then react to that. So let's hear from Craig Breslow, right? Because we had that great shot of Breslow during the game, finally having dinner. John Henry walking down the steps to talk to him. This is the epitome of the working lunch in Major League Baseball, right? Breslow said he got about 2 hours of sleep. So let's, before we react to and talk about Breslow, let's hear from him first. I always think that works best. Let's hear from him, then we'll react to it. So here's what Craig Breslow said last night when he met up with the media around 7 o'clock, just as the game began, which is why, by the way, we couldn't show it to you live. We spent 2 hours promoting live coverage of Craig Breslow's press conference, but we thought we should show the baseball game, so we didn't get to show Craig Breslow. Some people would have rather heard from Craig Breslow than watch that game last night. I understand that now, but we didn't know that at the time. So let's hear from Craig Breslow. This is what he said after the deadline came and went, and he was done with his first Major League Baseball trade deadline as chief baseball officer of the Red Sox.
First time in this seat, able to kind of follow the ups and downs, bit of a roller coaster. But I think that's pretty normal for this time of year. I think most fortunately we're able to accomplish what we set out to do.
Yeah, you stated kind of some of the needs that you wanted to us in Colorado. How satisfied are you with the acquisitions?
Yeah, I think anytime you can go to a deadline with a pretty clearly defined shopping list and walk out feeling like you accomplished it, I think you feel good about it. I think this team has shown that they are more than capable. We're winning. We have our sights set pretty squarely on the playoffs and deserve some reinforcements. So I think the combination of what we were able to bring in over the last couple of days and some guys getting healthy positions us really well.
Can you talk about what Sims and Garcia bring for you guys?
Yeah, so our bullpen was identified as an area of need. Both bring a little bit different repertoires. Sims with pretty dominant breaking ball, a ton of swing and miss. Garcia has been a pretty consistent performer in this league for a really long time, and so I think what it does is it lengthens out our bullpen, both from kind of a workload and gives Alex more options at the back end.
Do you expect them both here tomorrow?
We're actually, as I was coming up, we're working through logistics, so I don't quite know what the timetable looks like for their reporting.
You had said a preference was to get controllable players, but other than Priester, most of these guys are rentals. What was the dynamic there in terms of the market and asking prices on guys that you could control longer?
Yeah, I wasn't alone in seeking controllable players. It turns out, I think, unsurprisingly, and a lot of what happens over the deadline is dictated by the opportunities in front of us. I think I was pretty clear that we didn't want to walk out of the deadline without addressing the bullpen, the rotation, and getting a right-handed bat. And our preference would have been to bring in controllable pieces, but in the event that those didn't exist, we needed to get rentals.
Craig, you had talked about just the surplus of prospects in the system, the depth of the system, and how it's built up over the years, and to be able to trade several guys that are Rule 5 eligible. Was that sort of a goal almost heading in of trying to find guys like that would fit trades for you to be able to add to the current team?
Well, we're constantly having to manage the roster, right? And, that's not just the players who are on the 40-man roster, but also the players who are off and potentially eligible to be added. And, I think mostly the consideration was trying to address the needs of our big league team. And, fortunately, there are, plenty of areas through the minor leagues where we feel really good about the talent that we've amassed. But to improve the major league team, we have to make difficult decisions and trade good players, and those decisions are never easy. My guess is we traded a lot of major league talent today, but this is where we are, and I think the team has shown that they deserve to be reinforced.
So there it is. Reading between the lines, he's saying it's playoffs or bust, Alex. If they don't make the playoffs, this has been a horribly disappointing trade deadline for Craig Breslow.
I think that it might be a little bit more measured than that, but I think that they didn't overthink it, right? Like they identified, he talked about areas of need, things that he wouldn't have felt good walking past the trade deadline not having addressed. And again, as we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, they in some form addressed all of them. They didn't feel like they were going to have a well-rounded team if they didn't address the bullpen or if they didn't add a starting pitcher. They got those.
They did. And we saw Paxton last night make his Red Sox debut as we tape this. And I think we all agree that helps the depth of the starting pitching. Listen, I mean, you're watching these pitchers right now, and it's pretty clear that some of these guys are going to need a skipped start, are going to need a pushback, are going to need a breather. How much does a strengthened bullpen allow Alex Cora to accomplish some of that by maybe going to more not bullpen games, but getting to the bullpen sooner because now you have more arms that you trust out there?
Yeah, I mean, they have more pitchers. They have more major league caliber pitchers that you can use right now in games where you're leading, games that are close, and so they're in a better spot to avoid some of the overuse. Like the way that you could see it on that initial road trip, the absence of Slayton and Martin has been so glaring for them in terms of what they're trying to do with the bridge. And you've talked about them, extending starters, to your point, Tom, where they're trying to squeeze that extra inning out of guys, and then they just don't have their stuff as they get a little bit deeper in the game, particularly at this time of year. And then you simultaneously have them trying to like get more from the relievers, overextending guys who they'll bring back to the mound for a second inning of work, and then seeing things fall apart after a very good first inning of work. Obviously, we've seen that unfolding a couple of times with Zach Kelly over the month of July. So this allows them, they hope, to be able to deploy everyone in a way that permits them to be more effective and more available moving forward, because they have been, day to day, they've been really kind of scrambling to find 9 innings.
I had a handful of former players tell me yesterday, as I was talking to people after the deadline, that bullpen help is the one surefire thing to fire up a clubhouse, right? We've talked a lot about the psyche of a clubhouse after a trade deadline, right? And the 4 consecutive losing Augusts that they had under Chaim Bloom. Make of that what you will, but whatever the case, each of the last 4 years, 3, not 2020. That team was pretty much doomed from the start. But the other 3, right, whatever you did or didn't do at the trade deadline, it didn't translate to winning baseball in August. Okay, now, I again, it makes sense to me to players to say, strengthen my bullpen, I'm fired up for our chances over the last 2 months, right? Because to your point, what are they? As we talk, they're 3-8 since the trade deadline. Is that right? And
3-8
how many? I mean, they could. Yep. Yeah, they could have easily won. I'm sorry, since the All-Star break. Thank you. They could have easily won 4 or 5 of those 8 games that they lost, right? Because the bullpen.
Or they could have lost almost all of them as well.
Well, that's a good point. But thank you, Mr. Glass half empty. But the point being, when you bring in bullpen help, you're making your team stronger, especially when you've been losing games because of the bullpen. Okay, so all of that happens yesterday. And then they go out and play one of the ugliest games of the year, right? Another 3-error game The infield defense continues to be atrocious. You can talk about the errors all you want, but there are also just other plays that aren't made on a nightly basis in the infield. I didn't get to go over to Craig Breslow because it was 7 o'clock and the game was starting, and I hadn't eaten, so I had my dinner. And I didn't hear a lot of people talking about defense. Do you think there was ever a look? We talked about the right-handed bat. We talked about the relief help. We talked about starting pitcher. Was there any effort by this team to improve the infield defense at the trade deadline?
Yeah, it's a great question that you raise, and I can't say definitively one way or the other. What I can say is that from the time that I talked to Craig Breslow in Colorado, and this was a handful of days before the trade deadline on the day that they ended up extending Alex Cora, he was clear about the three areas of need that they had identified. They were taking a broad-based look at can we improve in whatever direction? That wasn't on the checklist, at least on the one that he identified and subsequently addressed. So, I think that you're looking at a team that when you have, say, Don Rafaela and David Hamilton on the field up the middle, you have guys with really impressive defensive tools. Obviously, excellent range on the part of both of those guys, given their speed. And frankly, Romy Gonzalez is also a guy who has speed and range. It's just been sloppy, right? It's looked at times like the ball was dipped in soapy water, and that's it is baffling. It's been a very ugly stretch for them. 18 unearned runs in those 11 games and 3-8 record. If you look at the Cleveland Guardians, one of the best teams in baseball, 27 unearned runs for the year. You're looking at a team that's part of that is driven also by extra innings games. I get it, right? Because there's that built-in runner on base that's an unearned run. But this has been a really woeful stretch of just converting plays that are makeable, right? Where they're the double play ball where the transfer is rushed and all of a sudden everything collapses. But to answer the broader question, I do not think that infield defense was high on the list of priorities.
And there's a number of places I want to go with that. One of which is Vaughn Grissom. Where does he factor into this, right? Because it is clear that they are taking their time and they don't feel like he was the guy they believe he's capable of being. So they almost, it's been like boot camp, right? It's no longer injury rehab. They're talking about strengthening and bulking up and becoming the athlete they think he can be. He's still very young. He'd be one of the youngest guys on this team. Is he the second baseman of the future for the Red Sox?
I think that's a TBD. I think that so there are two separate questions with Vaughn Grissom. Is he the second baseman of the Red Sox at any point in 2024? We did ask Craig Breslow that, and he said that he still saw Vaughn Grissom being part of the major league team this year, and that their view of him had not changed based on the injuries that he's been working through this year. So that's number one. And I think that it's funny because the way that David Hamilton had been performing for a significant stretch of the summer, I think that there would have been a sense that maybe you give Grissom this year to just get his footing back under him, because when you miss that much time, it is really hard to jump back onto the full speed treadmill and be the productive player that you want someone to be. So if you have a productive guy in that spot, then you're okay slow playing it. But as it turns out, David Hamilton right now, just over the last few weeks, is amidst a pretty profound struggle in which he's hitting something like 100 over his last 10 games. Relatively small sample, but you're worried about the physical toll of a season. So the Red Sox want to see the best version of Vaughn Grissom and make a decision based on that. When or whether we'll see that in 2024, not sure. Is Vaughn Grissom the Red Sox second baseman of the future? They don't need to make that decision until they need to make that decision, right? So I think that we're getting close to the point where the Red Sox, Craig Breslow also talked about the fact that the Red Sox are nearing a point where Marcelo Meyer and Roman Anthony and Kyle Teal are going to be in line for promotions to AAA. They'll want to give all of those guys a pretty decent amount of run in AAA. And you're going to have some interesting questions about the future shape of the Red Sox infield when Trevor Story gets healthy, But that would probably move Cedar Rafaela back to the outfield, or at least into more of a split role, more of a hybrid role. And then when Marcelo Meyer is ready for the big leagues.
Yeah, well, to me, it's one of the most interesting things about this team is for a team that we're all agreeing is, a playoff contender, right? That has made moves to strengthen their status as a playoff contender. I still couldn't tell you what the starting lineup is going to look like if they ever made the playoffs, because Trevor Story might be back, Tristan Casas might be back, Vaughn Grissom might be back, right? As Rafaela in center field. So who's not in the outfield? It was easy to think someone would bump Yoshida as the DH, but now I want Yoshida as the DH the way he's swinging. There's a whole lot in flux, which I find very interesting. And which is why I think Alex Cora is kind of uniquely qualified to be the manager of this team, right? It's an Alex Cora kind of team because he's pretty good at figuring out on a nightly basis what little marginal advantage he's going to get. The other night, taking Tyler O'Neill out of the game and pinch hitting Wilyer Abreu for him at the right point, and you had that great shot of a fairly long conversation for an in-game conversation between manager and player, because that's what Cora does so well, right? I always use the Brock Holt example, that Brock Holt became the first player in Major League history to hit for the cycle in a playoff game. He wasn't in the lineup the next day, and Brock Holt was okay with that because it was all part of the Alex Cora plan. But Alex Cora now being locked up, I thought it was interesting. Someone I talked to from another team said it was really smart to lock up Alex Cora before the trade deadline, because what you didn't want was Alex Cora talking about what we need and what we didn't get and what are we doing here, right? Not that he would have been that blatant, but he's pretty good at getting that message out between the lines when he wants to. So let's talk about that for a second. I mean, I think it was, and I didn't think of it at the time, but looking back at it now, I think it was a pretty shrewd move to get the deal done with Cora so that everybody was locked up and in lockstep going in and going through the trade deadline.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom, and one that I had probably underrated as well. But the fact that they were able to have a meeting of the minds organizationally, like kind of talk through a lot of things in what they both described as a very authentic way, right? Like when you're having those contract talks and thinking about the future, you can have very open conversations about what you see as the future, as the direction of the organization, and I think that's really helpful for. As Alex Cora and Craig Breslow were, still kind of in a getting to know each other phase, the fact that you were able to take everything away, get them, make sure that give them a really great opportunity to see things from, through similar prisms. They don't want to see things through the same prism. They want to be able to challenge each other, but even having the freedom to do that behind closed doors and then share a publicly facing message, I think is great. And then you're right. Like there's no, first of all, you probably are operating in lockstep rather than having any having everything that Cora says viewed through the lens of like, oh, was that a veiled shot? And was that a reference to the fact that he's not going to want to be around? And secondly, it takes away another potential off-field distraction from the team with this like hovering question of like, once you get to August 2nd and they lose 3 straight games, well, Alex is still going to be gone. Or what does this mean for Alex's market value when it comes to the offseason if the Red Sox struggle again down the stretch? All of that stuff is set aside. And now the focus is simply on who's in the organization, how are they getting used, and what are they doing to try to win?
All right, when you grade and look at a team's performance at the trade deadline, right, half of it is who they got and half of it is who they gave up, right? And so while I say, and I said at the beginning, that there wasn't the big, exciting, sexy major league name coming back in any of these deals, there wasn't. And let's put Nick York aside because I think that trade is put aside. Okay, that's a prospect for prospect. I want to get to that on its own in a couple of minutes. So let's table Nick York and remove him from this conversation. When we look at the rest of the prospects, because that is one name that fans have gotten to know, and I think some people, certainly Red Sox fans, think Nick York's got high upside, and you saw what he was doing at AAA Worcester. But the other prospects, when you look at the list there, if you had to pick someone, and again, most of these guys are players that not a lot of fans know a lot about. Talk about top 10 prospects in the organization. If you had to pick somebody on that list that you're worried about coming back to haunt the Red Sox, who would you go with?
Yeah, I think that the biggest upside guy is Ovis Portez, who I referenced earlier. He's the guy who has an electric arm. Like he was the Red Sox Florida Complex League took a field trip to the Trop earlier this season, and it was funny because there's this like lanky pitcher who's like a head taller than everyone else, right? Like 6'4", 6'5", and you're kind of poking around and it's like, oh, this is a guy who throws effortlessly 96, touches 98, room to fill out and start throwing harder, and also evidently has a slider that no one sees out of the hand, and so getting crazy swing and miss numbers at the very lowest levels of professional baseball. So he's the kind of shoot the moon upside guy, but of course he's a pitcher and he's years from the big leagues. So whether or not that's the guy who that's I would say that's the riskiest part of the trade that the Red Sox engaged in. The guy who there might be a few moments in the next year or so where you're like, oh, that guy would have helped the Red Sox. I would guess it's Matthew Lugo, who made really, really nice progress this year after struggling badly in 2023 in Portland. He returned to Portland this year, made some improvements in the offseason with his plate discipline and swing decisions, and had an incredible run in Double-A, where he was the best hitter in Double-A for the first couple months of the season. In Triple-A this year, after his promotion, he was okay, not spectacular, but he's a guy who probably has a chance, especially if he's able to move between positions rather than just being stuck in left field, to be a quality, productive big leaguer who's like a nice supporting cast member for a while.
All right, let's talk about the Nick York trade, or as we would call it, the Quinn Priester trade. I thought it was fascinating. It's the kind of trade you don't see a lot of during the season, right? These are usually off-season trades because, I said it on the air as it happened. It's, to me, they're the same player, just at different positions, right? You've got, they're both first-round picks. They were both top 10 in the organization at one point. They both slipped a little in their value, but still young enough where they have a long time ahead of them. In their own separate ways, they were sort of blocked in their respective organizations. So why not make the swap? The reason most people would react to is because maybe you could have used Nick York to get more to help this team now. Instead, you decided, I'm going to use Nick York to get a 23-year-old pitcher, the type of young pitcher that we have very little of, right? The type of, the Sandlin type of trade. This is why you traded Schreiber. This is why you tried to get guys like Richard Fitz in trades. You've been trying to bulk up your pitching depth as best you can because there's been so very little of it. They did that here. So to me, it spoke for itself. I was surprised that there was such a reaction, and I think it's just because everyone dreamed that Nick York would be the centerpiece of the Jack Flaherty deal, right? Or would be how you got Crochet. Well, that probably wasn't going to happen, everybody. What do you make of what they did get? What do you make of Quinn Priester, and what do you make of that trade?
Yeah, so Nick York burst onto the scene right after he was taken as a 2020 first-round pick, and while we were all sitting at home watching live feeds of alt-site games at McCoy Stadium, he made his professional debut to kind of like say goodbye to McCoy, and looked good, had a couple of good at bats, then had an amazing 2021 season that put him firmly in probably like top 50 territory in terms of prospects in baseball. And it felt like, oh, this guy could have really considerable upside. It's kind of been an up and down for him in the couple of years since, with a pretty big up in 2024, where he reestablished the player who he thinks, and I think he's pretty dead on, is going to be the best version of himself, which is to say, line drive hitter whose focus is on lining the ball to right center and then letting everything else play off of that. So left field line to right center, line drive, gap to gap hitter, and not necessarily like the power monster that you would say like, oh, that guy is going to be a perennial all-star. I think that Nick York has a chance to be a solid everyday second baseman in the big leagues. Some people question his defense. I think that his defense is a little bit underrated because he does a great job of doing something the Red Sox don't do a great job of right now, which is converting balls that he gets to into outs. But I think that, potential solid everyday second baseman. Quinn Priester, probably looking at him as like a potential solid back of the rotation guy, not necessarily an ace, not necessarily a number 3 as might have been forecast when he was a top 100 prospect a couple of years ago. So I think you're right. Like, these are very, very similar prospects in terms of their overall industry value. And it makes a ton of sense because both organizations drew from areas of strength. The Red Sox are loaded in terms of their middle infielders, and they also traded Edinson Paulino, who's another guy who's probably going to be like a fifth infielder type for a good number of years. And they traded from strength to address deficiencies, and the Red Sox have a glaring deficiency when it comes to upper levels potential starters that they needed to start filling in. They probably, they Perales Tommy John surgery, so he's not going to be addressing that before the end of 2025. Wickelman Gonzalez is taking a step back this year, so he's probably not addressing that in 2024, or certainly not in 2024, and probably not in 2025. Brian Mata, once again, it's not happening. So yes, the Red Sox are. I think that this was a very, very smart trade by both teams, and I think that they're good fits for where they're going.
Quinn Priester was assigned to Worcester, as we all know. The jaded would say that's to get the 25 more days so that they can extend control for another year. Baseball organizational people with the Red Sox will tell you there's things he needs to work on in Worcester, and maybe we'll see him in a few weeks, like 26 days from now. We'll see how that plays out.
Called the Nick Pivetta scenario, by the way. That's exactly what happened with Nick Pivetta when he was acquired in 2020. They kept him in the minors. They kept him at the alt site for exactly the number of days required to keep him under team control for one more year.
And it's just amazing how that's aligned with the number of days he needed to work on the things he needed to work on in the minors before getting a chance. Sometimes it just all lines up. I'm glad you bring that up, though, because I've had a few people talk to, a few industry people say, it'll be interesting to see if Quinn Priester becomes Nick Pivetta, not that type of pitcher, but the success track, or is he Connor Seabold? And those are the two guys they got in that deal, right? And Connor Seabold had a lot of potential. In fact, a lot of people in real time thought he was the catch of that trade, right? That he had more upside, and it never panned out here in Boston, obviously. Before we get to that, let's hear from Quinn Priester. Friend of the show, Natalie Norrie, was in Worcester and spoke with him when he arrived with the Woo Sox yesterday.
Excited. The organization speaks for itself, the history and the city and everything is there's a lot to be excited about. Be able to wear Red Sox across my chest, it's really special and something that's still setting in. Every single hour I'm here and being a part of the organization is really special.
Interesting guy, dominating numbers at AA, good numbers career-wise at AAA, really good career numbers this year at AAA, has had no success at the major league level as of yet. The general consensus, everything I've heard, is if he can add a couple miles an hour to the fastball, if he can find a little more velocity, the secondary stuff should play. What do you hear about Priester? And will he be someone they could turn to in September to maybe help with a little bit of depth, even if it's out of the...
Yeah, I think that Priester would certainly be a potential candidate to represent depth, whether it was to the rotation, if they need a spot start, or whether it is as a kind of multi-innings reliever. They're definitely open to that possibility in the shorter term. But they acquired him because they want to see what his upside is as a starter. He does have he's obviously in AAA now. He has an option left for next year, so they can take whatever time they think they need in order to try to develop the best version of him. But you're absolutely right. Craig Breslow yesterday said there's some things that we can play around with in terms of pitch mix and also strength program, which is to say, let's bump up the velo from being a guy who sits at 93, which used to be fine in Major League Baseball, but that's now below average for a right-handed starting pitcher, which is that's just where we are. And so you want to see where guys' careers can go if they're getting more power to stuff, and that's the state of the game. That's the state of the game at this point. But there are elements that they really like, which include he throws strikes, right? He works in the strike zone, so that's a good default. If his body moves in a way that allows him to stay in the big box, and then he also, while throwing in the strike zone, he also has typically gotten not too much hard contact against him, so that's pretty promising. So walk rate is good. Exit velo type, not hard hit rate type numbers are good, despite that sky high ERA. And so then from there you hope to like bump up the swing and miss a little bit maybe in order to get a better rounded pitcher who might be able to slot in at the back of a major league rotation.
All right, we've only got a few minutes left. I want to get to what this means to the prospects people care about for the most part, right? The big three, the big four, whatever you want to call them, but the top prospects, right? Meyer and Anthony and Teal have been languishing away in Double-A in the beautiful city of Portland, Maine. They've been hitting home runs onto my soccer field where the Hearts of Pine will play next year. So when will they stop damaging the soccer pitch and start launching their home runs to Union Station in Worcester? How imminent is movement here for the top prospects?
Yeah, really, the left-handedness of their top prospects has been very dangerous for your group there, Tom. I think we're on days from this moving. Craig Breslow again was asked very directly when might they move up, and he said we meet every week to discuss promotions, and we'll be meeting again on Monday. So it feels like. It would be surprising, I think, if we got to next Tuesday and that group hadn't moved up. I will note that Marcelo Meyer on Tuesday left a game with very mild hip soreness that the Red Sox think is essentially a non-issue. They're incredibly conservative with how they approach health stuff with minor leaguers, but I would expect all three to move up. If there's anything more significant than that mild soreness, then maybe that would change the trajectory, but I wouldn't expect that. I think that it's going to be AAA go time for those guys.
Which is great stuff. It's going to be fun to watch that. So let's wrap it up here with the inevitable exercise of grading what the Red Sox did. What would you give Craig Breslow and the Red Sox for a grade after their performance at the trade deadline?
Haven't we moved beyond grades? Haven't we just gone straight binary, pass, fail, or satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or whatever?
Yes. You want to give them a pass, fail, let us know. Did they pass or did they fail?
I think pass. I think that they're better. They're better than they were. They didn't hinder their future. They accomplished much of what they wanted. Like as we noted at the top, it was imperfect. So were I limited to that to those letters, then it certainly wouldn't be in the A bracket. I think that you're probably looking, depending on how grade inflation works, and I'm pro grade inflation, but it's somewhere just as an academic exercise, not in baseball. But I think that it's probably somewhere in the B's insofar as they did make a number of moves to get somewhat better. They did better than at least one of their wild card competitors, the Twins, who sat around twiddling their thumbs and did not reinforce their group, which is surprising. I don't think that they were too far off from what the Royals did. The Royals might have added a little bit more, but with a much greater sense of urgency because they haven't been good for a longer period of time. And I think that they probably didn't match what the Astros and certainly the Mariners did at the deadline, but again, the Mariners are operating with a pretty profound sense of urgency, and those teams are competing for a division title rather than that. What do you got, Tom? Are you a grader? What's your? How do you? Yeah,
I'm a grader. No, I'm a grader. I would give them a B minus. I guess I'm a little tougher grader than you. C plus was my initial thought. But which again is, I was not Ivy educated like you. I was not academically driven. I think a C plus and B minus is a perfectly fine way to send this. I would never tell my kids that, but you got through it. You got through it. It's your freshman year. It's his first year. It's his first semester. A B minus is perfectly fine. It probably isn't for an academic like Craig Breslow, if we were talking about academics, but we're talking about
Probably
baseball.
hasn't gotten a lot of B minuses.
That's right. So there you go. Sorry, Craig. Here's your first B minus. Okay, with the curve, I'll give you a B. I think they got through it. I think they did marginally accomplish what they needed to accomplish. I think, again, I'll give him an incomplete because I think, if Quinn Priester turns out to anything, this becomes a really good trade deadline. I keep going back to that as a sort of outlier because I just think it's such a fascinating trade in this day and age. You just don't see many of those prospect for prospect. So that could be real upside that turns this trade deadline. Can you go back and, it's like changing an error to a hit later?
I'm actually going to jump in. It's actually interesting on a couple of levels. So one, Jared Saltalamacchia was around Fenway yesterday, right? And he was a guy who was acquired at the 2010 trade deadline, which was viewed as a big nothing burger by Theo Epstein and company, where it was like you didn't address the needs of the club. But Saltalamacchia ended up being obviously a valuable part of the 2013 World Series team. And for that matter, 2012, when the Red Sox made a move to acquire at the deadline, Craig Breslow, and they acquired Craig Breslow and actually Stephen Wright, which in what was viewed as kind of a deadline where they did not move to shore up the soon-to-be sinking Bobby V ship, and they instead, it was like, you're making moves that are on the margins and fringy. And obviously Breslow ended up being a very important part of 2013. Stephen Wright, further down the road, who was acquired for Lars Anderson, also ended up being a significant contributor. So yeah, I actually think that a lot of times the best trades, the best deals are the ones that end up being these kind of addressing future value deals. But you're right. It's we have a short-term grade and a long-term grade, and we have no idea what the long-term grade is going to be. But short-term is kind of the primary focus. So we can revisit. I look forward to the 5th year anniversary of the 2024 trade deadline episode that you and I will be doing in 2029. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with your projections that this show's on the air in 5 years because, again, you are more analytically inclined than I am, so I'm going to assume your projections are better than mine. Mine say there's little no chance we're here for the 5th anniversary, but what do I know? I agree, and that's why the Priester thing's important because that is the only deal they made for the long term. Right, everything else is to make this team better, which is why I'm pretty happy with it. I think a B minus is a good grade because I think they've helped this team a little bit, and this team has been pretty good without the help. We'll see if the bullpen helps enough. But that's it. We're out of time. That flew by. Alex, it was fun. Well done, and we appreciate your undying, you've been, how many, real quickly, I say we're done. And I always do this in interviews too. Final question, then 9 questions later, I'm finally wrapping it up. But how many years have you done the trade deadline special with us? And I know you haven't been every year, but I'm trying to think of that yesterday, and we didn't really have a chance to get into it. It's got to be like 15?
Yeah, right around 10. No. I think I'm around 10 because I started doing stuff with Nesson in 2015. So, yeah.
2015. Okay.
Yeah.
So 10.
Yeah. So this is, yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah. Pretty
Yesterday
long time.
it was disappointing. We've done them all. And except here's a little, and we don't have time for this, but I wasn't there for the Nomar trade. I took the day off. And it was a Saturday afternoon. We didn't do a trade deadline special back then, and somebody was having
Jack's
a milestone birthday. Yeah, it was Jack's birthday, and it was somebody else's birthday. We were on the Cape for a milestone birthday, and I got a call, get in here. And I was like, so I tried to get in from the Cape. You can't get in from the Cape on a Saturday afternoon. Nope. It was going to be like a 4-hour drive. So anyway, yeah, thanks for helping yesterday. It's always fun. I love the trade deadline show. It's not like it used to be. There aren't as many last minute blockbusters, but the unknown is always fun.
It is. And Tom, I would like to give you a great inflated A.
Thank you. That's because I cheated. But that's fine. I'll take it. All right. I'm being told we're out of time. So we're out of time. Alex, we'll do it again next week. It was fun. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. That does it for 310 to left.